Okay, so I think this is where we left last time. All right. So we first talk about the before we talk about all the graphic objects in the HMI design, we first we have a overview, right? So because there are so many objects, right? So I have the software today, so I can do some demo with you. But for now, you can see here, this is the FactoryTalk View Studio, right? So remember, there's two ways to select graphic objects. One way is to select from this shortcut icons, right? So remember, when you move your cursor through those little pictures, right? So they give you a tooltip, right? So those icons represent, each one of them represent a graphic object or component. So this is one way you can select. The other way is to click objects from the menu, right? So once you move your cursor through those different categories or groups, you will see more detailed objects show up on here, right? So last time I count those objects, there are 64 of them, right? Quite a lot. So we won't learn all of them for this course. There's simply too many of them, all right? That's why you need to have some sort of overview, right? So that's why over here, those wordings I directly get from their menu, from Rockwell menu. So they separate those objects into 4 different you can call groups or categories or whatever you can like separate them. All right. So one type of objects is to illustrate, right? Is to like I mentioned before, is more like a appearance or showing, all right? Showing your the design, all right, to illustrate. And the other type is like control, right? Control your application. So that means allow you to be able to jump to different display. So for example, right? Or to allow you to have a pop-up window or close that pop-up. There are all kinds of functions you want to have with your application, right? These two categories, to illustrate, to control, is pretty much not much to do with your PLC. The other two is that the middle one you can see here, right? So this one is specifically interact with your data source, right? That means with your PLC mostly, right? Of course, there are also other kind of devices you can interact with HMI, but mostly PLC. So with PLC, you can either change the tag value on the PLC, or you can view, right? You can display the value of the PLC tags, right? So that's why I first want you to have this kind of overview picture with all the objects. All right, there are quite a few of them, 64 of them. They all can be categorized into these 4 different groups, right? So I want you to keep that in mind. And with those 64 objects, like I mentioned, we don't need to learn all of them. So over here, I have 7 of them into this chart. So we only need to learn 7 of them for this course. With these 7 objects, you can design a pretty decent HMI application, no problem, right? So that's why I need you focus on, right? Focus on these 7 objects. So the first object is called text, right? So generally speaking, that belongs to a category called drawing object. Drawing object, that means you can draw a circle, you can draw a square box, right? So all kinds of things you can do with the graphic. So you can see the purpose or the type of this object is to illustrate, right? So the detailed function, you can see create a text for label, right? You can, for example, you can create something to let operator know what's this display for, right? For the title, right? Or for instructions. I think when you work in the lab, you notice that I use a lot of the text object to direct you to go through different part and the applications, right? So you can use that in your design as well. The other second object is the go-to display. So you already understand that, right? With the demo, that's the purpose is to control, right? To open the graphic display, right? For the navigations. So those two are pretty straightforward, right? Like I said, these two objects, they don't interact with the PLC, right? Normally. Right. Normally, if you want, you could. They have some actual features. You can interact with PLC, but normally we don't have to. Especially in this course, at the introductory level, you don't have to. Right. But later on, there's something we can introduce. For example, with the text object, that's another thing we call feature called animation. We can set it up with the text object, but that's not what we're going to talk about today, right? So in addition to these two objects, we will look at the actual 5 objects, all right? These 5 objects, you can see here, either they change the PLC tag value, right? These 3 objects, or you look at the value from the PLC. So that's the other 2 categories, right? So the objects we're going to talk about. So far, we need to focus on the first 3. One is maintained push button. The other one is momentary push button. We understand the difference between these 2, right? So we don't have to go through this, right? One is maintained, the other one is momentary, right? And those are the push buttons. So when you press the button, you change the tag value, right? Remember, HMI is meant to replace the traditional hardwired push button, right? So that exactly is the same thing with the hardwired button, right? When you press button, normally open become close, right? You will have the same effect with HMI component, right? So the other thing with the HMI tag is the multi-state indicator, right? So that is one object we can use to represent a lot of things. One thing you can think of is the PL, pilot light, right? Because you can see here with the multi-state indicator, it can change its color, right? Different colors according to the value, right? Because that will respond the tag value, right? Or the caption. Caption, that means that's the text or label on the multi-state indicator, right? So the purpose of the color and caption is to indicate the states of the process. Each state set up to correspond to one of the values of the same tag, right? So you connect this multi-state indicator with one PLC tag, the same tag, but this tag could have different values, right? You know that really depends on the type. So far in our course, we only talk about the bool tag, right? So BOOL, right? So sorry about the writing. BOOL can only have either 0 or 1. So that means you have 2 different states, right? With 2 different states, you can have different color, different captions. Very soon, we're going to talk about different type of tag, right? So that's the tag we can I can write down here called DINT, D-I-N-T. So that tag represent numbers. So that this kind of tag can have more than 2 values, actually a lot, millions values, right? Because they can represent big numbers. So that can also connect to a multi-state indicator, right? And then for that particular multi-state indicator, you can have more than two states, right? So we'll talk about those when we get into the details on the object, all right? So, but for now, I just want you to know we need to focus on 7 objects. Those 2 objects you can see here, those are related to numerical component, right? So numbers, right? So we're also, even though we haven't talked about on the PLC part, the counterpart on the PLC, but we can learn this HMI object before we can talk about on the instructions with PLC. All right, so let's move on to next slide. So on this slide, I first want you to know that there are 2 ways to select object. I already mentioned that, right? So objects menu or objects on the toolbar, right? So that's how do you select. So you first need to select the tool to create different object. So once you select the tool, you can start to create. When you once you select a tool, I don't know if you notice the cursor change. All right, I have the software over here. I can demonstrate that. All right, so like right now, you can see this is a regular cursor. Right, I'm showing you on here. Right, I can change back even to, you can see here it's more regular cursor. Right, I'm circling around with the arrow. So if I select object, so I can select from this, the logo or icon, right? So you can notice here, right? You can see my cursor. Not only you can see the arrow, right? There's something on there, and there's a text on here, right? My screen is that too small. You won't be able to see, but if you look at on here, it shows some button, right? So that means you already select this object. And then if you select different object, and that you can see the icon change. So that means you choose different object. All right, so that's the current object. So for example, right now I'm selecting a circle of tooling, right? So if I draw that, that means I create an object of the circle, right? So I can delete that. Yeah, I can delete that. And then I can choose different one, right? So that's the other thing I want you know that. So once you select the tool, if you want to deselect, right? If you want do the opposite, right? Either you can double click, right? You double click any empty slot, empty spot, or you can click other objects, right? Or you can choose this. This is called select tool, right? So I list these 3 different ways on here, right? You can double click an empty area, or you can click select tool, or if you choose another tool, you simply deselect the previous one, right? And you already know that. I already demonstrate how do you play the object. Click the mouse and you can start to draw, right? But maybe the first time when you place the object on the display is not the place you want, right? You may want to change the location. Here's how, right? If you want move your object, right? Change to different location, you can first select the object, right? And then once you click the object, you have this object being selected. You can start to drag, right? So I can demonstrate that on there. So for example, this is a go to display, right? That's from the previous design. I can select. Notice over here, it has a select tool surrounding the object, right? So you can certainly move to different location, right? If you want. The other thing you can do with the handle is that you can resize it, right? Notice on these pictures, right? So you can resize them by drag this corner. You can make bigger or smaller, right? So that will allow you to make some adjustment on the object. And the other thing is that you want to configure the object, right? If you notice there, so whenever you first time create a object, so for example, if I want create a let's just say there's a shutdown, that's same thing here, shutdown, right? You can create your own as well. Once you create this object, the property window automatically pop up, right? So you can close it. And but later on, if you want reopen it, right, just simply double click, then that will open up the window, right? If you want to choose other object, you can also double click on other objects. So the property window for that particular object will open, right? So of course you can delete that, the object on here. So there are lots of things we need to talk about properties, because each object has more than what we need for the setting up the properties. So that's what we're gonna focus on next. All right. So the properties for the graphic object can be grouped into different tabs. So first, I will use a text object as an example. So for example, if we want create a text object, so once you create the text object, the property window will open up, right? So I think this is the picture I get from the older version. Right now, probably there are more than 2 tabs. Let's try it, all right? So I'm gonna create another text object. So if you move on here, you will see this one, follow my cursor, right? So if you highlight this tool, that shows you this is a text, right? Select this tool, you can see, you can start to draw on here, right? Draw on here, then once you release, you can see the property window pop up. Okay, I was right. There's only 2 tabs on here, right? Because it's a simple object. So the text properties has only 2 tabs. One is called general, the other one is called common, right? Underneath the general, so basically that's the box you can type in, right? For example, this is my main screen, right? So I can type in main, right? For example, that's what I want to label with as a title for this uh, object, for this display. Notice that's the text object is too small, right? Of course, you can change it, you can resize it, similar to Word, right? So like Microsoft Word, you can change different size on here, right? You can even change the font color, right? For example, if we want to change it to light blue, right? So that will reflect on there, right? So this is what you can set up with the text object. You can set up the caption or the label or the color or the size. So the other tab is called common, right? So this underneath this tab, there's some numbers to correspond to the location of this object, or the size, right? First, you can see the height and width and the position on the top and left corner, right? So for example, if you change that to 150, all right, you can see it on there, and that automatically change this object locations. All right, sorry about that. So double click, you can open that again. All right. So the purpose of this, you know that of course you can, without this window, like you can relocate, like we talked about before, you can click this object, relocate to anywhere you want, right? The purpose of this com tab is that if you want to make very accurate control, for example, with the top, right now it's 39, I can change to 40. So that number is the pistol number on the display, right? You can have very accurate control on that, right? If you want to be very picky on the locations with your object, you can very precisely control over here with the numbers. For example, if you want to line up the object, you can do it in this way. All right. So the other thing I want to mention with the text object is that it has 2 tabs, right? One general, the other one is com. Those 2 tabs are very shared tabs with pretty much all the objects, right? So I think I mentioned on here, right? General, most, you can see here, most graphic object has these 2 tabs, right? So once I talk about this text object, I don't need to talk about those two tabs for other objects, right? Once, for example, later on when we talk about push button, they also have these two tabs, right? So that's what I mean by this two tabs. We need to know about the text object. So next object, I want to talk about the push buttons. All right, push button objects. So there are two categories with this FactoryTalk View Studio. You will see maybe in the later when we talk about a newer one called View Designer, they don't separate maintain momentary anymore. They put combine together as one object. But this one, this current version we're using, FactoryTalk View Studio, they're still using two different objects, right? So there are sometimes in the lab, you create a wrong button. You're supposed to create a momentary, but you create a maintain, then you don't have any chance to switch them over. You have to delete the old one to recreate a new one because they are different objects. You have to choose different tool. Right? And regarding the momentary, we all know that with momentary, there are two different types of the button. One is normally open, the other one is normally closed. You will see that right here on underneath the general. Remember the general tab, right? So with the push button, if you look down on here, there's one section called the button settings. And underneath there, there's a one setting you want to set up the actions with associated with the button. The default is normally open. Right? In the lab, I ask you to design normally close. So when you design the normally close button, you need to remember come over here to select the this is called radio button, right? Radio selection. Default is normally open. You need to select the normally close. I can show you on here on the demo, right? So this is I think this is one button we created last time, right? Momentary. If I double click, you can see here, right? Momentary push button, right? Underneath that, the action is normally open, right? So I can zoom in a little bit, let you to look at this part of the. Oh, sorry. Here, right? So. All right, so this is the section I talk about, all right? So either you have normally open, which is a default, or you can choose, like right now, I can click on this, change that action to normally close. In this way, the button will change to normally close, right? There's a third option called value. It's just some advanced features. We don't have to talk about that. It's just with one button, you can change to different value. Instead of 0, 1, you can have different values, right? But that's not the normal feature we want to set up with button, right? So now I just want to demonstrate if you change this settings from the default normally open to normally close, what will happen, right? So I need to zoom out now. Just give me a minute. Okay, so let's keep the change to normally close. If I choose close, and then that means it's running now. So I have the PLC running as well. All right. So I'm gonna close down this controller organizer, right? Because that occupies some of the area. All right. So we can just click this auto high, right? So then this window I can reset on here. And same thing for this FactoryTalk View Studio. All right. So on the left hand side, you can see there's a Explorer window. I can just I don't need to have it open all the time, right? So I just need to double click, make the other one open. Then I can close down this sub window. So now I have two display open. All right. So you can do the same thing in the lab with your design. All right. So in order to see more on here. So now we are at the this main, right? So before it was the normally open button, right? So now I changed that, right? You can see here, I changed that property to normally close, right? So let's see what that reflect on the PLC. So now it's still in the design. Once I click on this button, it's called test display, right? Once I test display, you can see here. Okay, sorry, I made a mistake again. All right. Right now on the PLC, we're looking at lab 1. Momentary. Yeah, that's right. Oh, yeah. That's right. That's right. So that's something I want to talk about on here. So the button needs to be pressed in order to update the connections. So this is something peculiar for the HMI with PLC, right? Remember I changed that before, but before I press that connection is not being refreshed. So that's why it's not showing on my PLC. Once I click on it, you can see here, right? This button is released. And then on the PLC, if I highlight this PB, you can see the value is 1. Because this button, I already changed that to normally close, right? Normally close button, if you don't press it, it's tag value 1, right? But when I press it, you can see here, right? So that's what I want you to see, right? So that's because you choose different property on the button that you change the behavior of that button. Everybody follow me, right? So again, if I double click this, this is something, because right now I'm running so many software on my laptop. I think it's just something where if I double click, oh, sorry again. It's just I'm still running in the testing mode, right? So click the edit, you finish that. So double click, you open up the property, right? The property window that right now is normally closed, right? So if I change it back to normally open, click OK. So you will see here, this is a design again, all right? So now if I press this test display, remember those buttons, right? Test display, you're running with the connection. Remember I said you need to press at least once of the button in order to refresh the connection, right? This is something maybe, I don't know, it's particular functions with the Rockwell design, right? So right now, if I press this button, you can see that changed to normally open now, right? Right now, the button is released, right? And then that one is, you can see here, the tag value 0, right? So let me go back to the property again. Perhaps it's easier for us to set up the caption. So that's why I recommend you, not recommend, in this course, I ask you to set up the captions for the push button. So remember that on the push button, so state 0 is where you need to remember on there. I'll show you on the slide. So no matter what button, you may have a normally open button or normally closed button momentary, or you may have a maintain button, all right? They are the same. The state 0 is the state when the button is released. So that's why I recommend you on the caption, always set up the caption as release, right? Of course, you can set up the size. You can see here. So that tells you this is a released state. All right. Then in the same time, the color, you can see the default dark blue. I can accept it. All right. The other property you want to set up with button is that with push button, it has 2 different states, right? State 0 is the release. Remember, we already set up as the released caption. When you highlight on the left-hand side, on the state 1, the caption is empty because you haven't set up yet, right? So over here, I recommend you press, right? So this is something, maybe 18 size. You can see here, that's different. At the same time, the back color is red. right? So in this way, you set up this button in different appearance. So you let operator to notice, okay, the button is being pressed or released, right? That's a good indication on that, right? So with common, you already know that it's the size and the position. With the connection, already demonstrated on the previous one, right? There's a value you need to set up for the lab 1 PB. Right, already set up on this. So we can click OK. So this time we just make the appearance more detailed, right? Different color, different caption. So now we can test. So once you press the test display, you can see right now your button, it shows the caption released. So it is released because it's normally open, right? So you can see the tag value is 0, right? So once you press it, you can see the caption change, the color change, right? In the same time on the PLC, right? I cannot do that with this on the both sides, all right? So, but you can see that the action, right? Released blue, a caption, pressed is the different states, right? So that's how do you set up the push button. Let me quickly go through on that. So those are the action. Let's see here. This is already mentioned that, right? So you notice here there are two different states, right? So you need to set up both states. State 1 is release. I think on the next slide I mentioned that. Yeah. So this is something I want you pay attention. All right. So this is something I already mentioned. State 0 is the release, right? For normally open, the tag value 0 will be sent to the PLC. Remember, this is a push button. You want to interact with PLC, so you want to change the tag value. So state 1 is the press state. Again, because it's a normally, right now we are seeing a normally open button. So when you have the pressed state become active, the value 1 will send to the tag value, right? So notice here, I put over here, if you set up as normally closed, the value is the opposite. All right. So now I can do a demonstrate on this, on this part. So in order for you to fully understand for these settings here. So let's look at this stop testing now. So if we open this property window again, so notice here right now, this is normally open, which is a default. And then when we open the states, so now I want to draw your attention to here. So on left hand side, you have state 0, state 1. All right. On the right hand side, you can see here underneath general, you have a value. All right. So that means when you have state 0, you have value 0 sent to the PLC. When you have state 1 become active, you will have a value 1 sent to PLC, right? Because this object is meant to change the tag value on the PLC side. And also notice this box on the value is being grayed out, right? Even though you can see I double click on it, you cannot highlight. It's not same as caption. You can see here caption, you can change, like for example, I can type in, right? Value 1. For example, if you want to make it clear, you can do this, right? Its background is white. That means you can change it. When you apply that, you can see that change here. But this value over here, you cannot change it. It's system design, right? Because this is, you choose that as normally open right now, right? So now if I choose this normally close, see what happened on here. So this button changed to normally close. Now, when I apply on it, then go to states. You can see state 0 correspond value 1, and state 1 correspond value 0. So now this is not appropriate. I need to delete that. All right. So that's what I want you to realize. All right. So when you press button on the HMI, right, they behave differently. One is normally open, one is normally closed. What exactly happened behind on the background is it's this one, right? You choose the action on here, and then that system will decide, the software will decide the value correspond to the action. All right. So that's what behind the button settings. All right. So that's on this part. I want you to be aware with this. All right. So let's move on to I think I already talked about this, right? So you don't have to I don't have to read this, right? You can read that at home by yourself. So about the other thing I want to talk about with the connection property, right? So one thing is that how do you get connection, right? So we already demonstrated that, right? So once you have the property window, you need to click the button underneath the tag, right? So if I can show you again, right? If you go to connections, right, there's a buttons underneath the column of tag. You need to press those two buttons to set up connection. The other thing I want to talk about, why there's two of them, right? One is called value, the other one is called indicator, right? So in this course, on this slide, it's just actual information, right? Because we are on here, I just need to talk about on here. So sometimes when you start on the browse tag, so this is a extreme case, right? I can show you on here on the left-hand side, there are lots of folders on here. Again, this is a extreme. I have a lot of things on PLC, so that's why you see a lot of them on there. I just want to make sure you understand which folder represent what data. So on the first level, you can have a offline folder. So that means you don't have to have a PLC online to browse the tag. You can browse the offline file. Right? That's different topic. We don't have to talk about today. All right. I think I have another video posted online. You can watch that. Right. So mostly in our lab, we will focus on this folder called online because that's what's running on the PLC right now. So once you go into the online folder, you will see different folders on here. So one type of the folder, it has program column as the prefix. So that correspond to different programs you create within PLC. All right. Then there are also other folders underneath here. Those tags, those folders, you can see here, that's called complex tag, or we call structures. For example, timers. Later on, we will talk about timers counters. If you create on the controller level, you will see here underneath this online folder. Right, so we know there are two different scopes, right? One is called controller level, the other one is called program level, right? Controller level is right underneath the online. But if you want to look at the private or local level on the program, you have to highlight one of the folders with this program. All right, so I can demonstrate what happened on my file on here. So for now, I can open up this controller organizer now, right? So you can see on the left-hand side underneath here, I have these two programs, right? I have a controller tag, I have the main program and program one, right? So that's three things I want you to notice on the PLC. Then on my HMI, all right, on my HMI, if I click on this tag, you can see on here, this is the tag browser, right? So if we refresh all folders underneath the My PLC, which is the shortcut name we create, all right? So you will see here, right? So there's an online folder on here, right? So we use online folder, we create on here. So remember here, Okay, here. All right. So right now I'm highlighting this program called Lab 1 that actually correspond to this, right? So you can see if I click on the PLC side, so there PB and PL created on here. So that's underneath the program Lab 1. But if I click on this one, that's underneath the main program. Actually, that's from here. So this is not a very good demonstrate because they have same tag name. But what I mean is that they have different scopes. So that corresponds to different folders on the tag browser. All right, so this is what I mean by this slide. All right, the other thing is the reason for the uh, indicator and the value tag, right? So for that, this is the explanation on here, but I can demonstrate on this. So just give me two more minutes. All right, so I can set it up on here. What do you mean by here? So in the lab, I ask you to set up both connections into the same tag. All right, so I'm going to show you what happens if you don't set up. All right, so with the push button on here, I remove the indicator and I apply it on the change, click OK, close down on here. Right, so if I press the test, so you can see this is released. And on the PLC side, all right, here. So momentary will be on the lab 1. All right, so here. So right now the tag value is 0, right? You can see here when you press, yeah, it is there some delay on here. All right. Oh, this is the normally close setup, right? I think we can use that, right? Remember, this is right now. This is let's go back to normally open. Yeah, this is normally open, right? So that's easier for you, for us to understand that, right? So let's just test display. Okay, so right now this is normally open button now, right? When it's released, tag value is 0. When you press, you can see the tag value changes to 1 right now on the PLC side, all right? So this is the setting. But right now, if I change on the PLC, change that tag value to 1, right? And notice the PL turned on, right? That means the value already changed, but your button didn't reflect the change. So that means the button actually is being, for example, if you have two different buttons on different, same button on different HMI, somebody else could press the button, right, on different HMI, but on your HMI, you don't have that reflect on the design. So that's why we need to set up this indicator on here to the same tag value. So once I set up this, click OK on this. Hopefully it won't crash on me, all right? No, it didn't. PB. Oh, wrong one. You can see here, I choose the wrong one. I have to change that. Go to this one and click PB. So you can see that's the same tag. Click OK. So now I have the indicator set it up. So then I can run again. So now it shows pressed. You can see here, right? So if I change on the PLC side, change it to the 0, that change to release, right? That's the function of indicator. So you want to set it up, right, in order to reflect the changes on the tag value on the PLC. Okay, so I think I can stop here. And if you have the